I don't believe that the desire to remake the world in your image is a noble desire. And that is something that we find in the extreme forms of Abrahamic faith. Now, sometimes there are boiling points which are reached beyond which the Dharmic traditions are overcome. And so I think that's where a defensive mentality has to be constructed. And for better or for worse, that's starting to develop now. And I think that poses a strength and a weakness even to us, because we need to make sure that it's tempered in such a way that it doesn't turn pseudo-Abrahamic in its own way. So I think if we can become a missionary religion again, and conversely, if Abrahamics can tone down the proselytizing aspects and maybe even just go back to being missionary religions, we can coexist. I don't see an issue. Why not?
Rishi, welcome to the Story Bar. So you're a content creator, you make content around Sanatana Dharma, and you're doing a brilliant job. In your own words, who are you and what do you do?
So I guess you put it really succinctly, Siddharth. I'm a Dharmic content creator. I try to cover topics within the fields of Indology and Hindu studies, and I'm primarily focused on correcting misapprehensions and misrepresentations of Sanatana Dharma, particularly within Western culture, because I am a diasporic Hindu, and just basically trying to educate people within the diaspora as well.
Right. So let's pick it up from there. What are the three biggest apprehensions that you see within Abrahamics regarding the Hindu religion?
So obviously, I guess you can divide the apprehensions into social and theological. I think socially, the biggest two are caste and patriarchy. Within patriarchy, you have subsets like sati and various misogynistic perspectives and such. And the third point would be probably theological, which of course covers a breadth of topics, polytheism, supposedly, and other such doctrinal aspects that Abrahamics and people outside and sometimes even inside the Hindu fold can't really apprehend.
Right. Talk more about it, Rishi. If, let's say, I am the Abrahamic, I'm the Christian, I'm the Muslim, I'm the Jew. I ask you, hey, Rishi, I've heard that you have 33 crore gods. How do you even counter this? Or how do you even start answering this question?
So I guess this can be answered in two ways. The first is the literal way, which is that's merely a mistranslation of the term Korti. So Korti does mean crore in many cases, but in this case, it's referring to the 33 types of devatas which one encounters in the Vedas. And regardless, besides the literal translation aspect, there's another level on which we can take this, which is more doctrinal, which is within Sanatana Dharma, you have a variety of traditions that approach divinity in a variety of ways. This doesn't mean that they're all worshipping different deities necessarily. There isn't that necessity that exists within many Abrahamic traditions for there to be one true embodiment of divinity. Divinity can be understood in various ways. Everybody knows the truism from the Rig Veda, right? Ekam Satya Prabhahuta Vadanti. So without delving too much into that, we can understand that it comes from a paradigm that is perhaps foreign to Abrahamic thought, which is approaching divinity through a variety of ways because of the plurality of traditions and perspectives within Sanatana Dharma.
Correct. And so just coming back on the Abrahamic thought here, what are some of the advantages that Abrahamic faiths hold on over the Dharmic faiths? Because one thing which we cannot deny is that they have been really good at expansionism. There are 50 odd Muslim countries, I think more than that. Christian nations, they have been really good in expanding their religion, while Dharmic faiths are, secluded to India and some Buddhist nations, Southeast Asian Buddhist nations, Sri Lanka, Shintoism in Japan, Nepal. So we are not like a missionary religion. We do not go out actively converting people, but that also means that more often than necessary, we are always in the defensive of trying to save our people from the claws of the Abrahamic faith. What are the things that you feel that we can take from the Abrahamic faith in Hinduism so that not only it survives, it thrives? And what are something that they can take from us in their tradition? And I know the core tenets would not allow taking what we have as a school of thought in Hinduism. But even if, let's say, we do this thought exercise, what would you suggest?
So I guess I can take that in two parts. The first part being what are the strengths and weaknesses of our respective traditions. And I would say that which is our strength is also our weakness, and similarly so for the Abrahamics, which is that we have a tendency to be very decentralized, very localized, and as a result, there's a lack of homogeneity necessarily across all the Dharmic traditions. Whereas it's the opposite for many of the Abrahamic traditions. They have, even though they might be separated by denomination or sect, they have this overarching idea of unity when it comes to an in-group versus out-group sort of mentality.
Yeah.
However, I would say that that's also their weakness, because I think morally there's something to object with to that. I don't believe that the desire to remake the world in your image is a noble desire. And that is something that we find in the extreme forms of Abrahamic faith. So as far as the strength goes, their strength is homogeneity and the ability to mobilize as a result of that homogeneity. And for us, despite the fact that we have not been able to necessarily mobilize because of our heterogeneity, we have survived due to the very fact of that sort of pluralism that's baked into us. We have this tendency to welcome a thought that is external to our traditions and somehow get it to assimilate. And that's sort of how you can say Sanatana Dharma has grown to begin with, its interaction with local traditions and assimilating even foreign traditions. Now, sometimes there are boiling points which are reached beyond which the Dharmic traditions are overcome. And so I think that's where a defensive mentality has to be constructed. And for better or for worse, that's starting to develop now. And I think that poses a strength and a weakness even to us, because we need to make sure that it's tempered in such a way that it doesn't turn pseudo-Abrahamic in its own way. And I guess the second part of your question was, how can we learn from each other, right? And when it comes to that, I don't believe that Hindus necessarily should proselytize. If you see my page, you know that I'm heavily influenced by the work of Dr. Arvind Sharma. And he has written on how Hinduism hasn't been a proselytizing religion, but it's been a missionary religion in the past. And that means that while it has not sought out converts, it has gone and spread to various parts of the world. How did we get Hinduism in Bali? How do we get Hinduism even in different parts of the Indian subcontinent? It was ultimately because there was outreach from the Hindu perspective, but it wasn't necessarily to get people to abandon their traditional beliefs. And it was rather actually in an inclusive sort of sense. So I think if we can become a missionary religion again, and conversely, if Abrahamics can tone down the proselytizing aspects and maybe even just go back to being missionary religions, we can coexist. I don't see an issue. Why not?
Right. And just coming back on this thing, when you said that Abrahamics need to tone down on their conversion rate, it is something that is theologically not possible for them, because they actively seek more and more members in their in-group, right? So the case of their in-group versus out-group is really strong. The larger the in-group, the more better it's for them. And then that stretches to infinity. If there are 8 billion people of the world, ideally Christianity or Islam needs to have all 8 billion people as part of their in-group. And anybody who's not part of that in-group is always a part of an out-group, which is the ripe target to convert or attack or humiliate. We use A, B, C, Sam, Dand, Bhed, all the traditions to basically bring that person as part of the in-group, which we do not necessarily do, because we have a Shastra tradition, which Adi Shankar used very effectively against Mandan Mishra, or especially against the Buddhists, I think, which Dr. Ambedkar has noted really well. Against his fight for Adi Shankara, that he went across the entire length and breadth of India, converting the entire India back to Hinduism after the Buddhism had taken over. So coming back to this question, right? So when Abrahamics view dharmic traditions, right, they see us as different religions. So they feel that Buddhism is a religion, Hinduism is a religion, Sikhism is a religion. But when we view it like a branch of a tree, right? So the root is Sanatana, but the branch of the tree could be Sikhi, could be Buddhism, could be Jainism, could be these Gnostic and Astic faiths, Charvak traditions. How do you explain it to them? Like, how do you tell them that, these are not different religions, man, these are just the different punts of the same faith?
So I guess this is where we have to understand, and this is a concept we can take from post-colonial studies, the entire idea that the European or the Abrahamic paradigm is not the paradigm through which the entire world functions or even views itself. And if we utilize colonial logic to try and perceive or understand the ways in which we live, we will fall into certain traps which are then impossible to get out of. So the idea of religion itself is one of these Eurocentric categories which has been imposed on us. Of course, there wasn't necessarily that sort of consciousness prior to the period of colonialism under which India went through. And this was solidified because of the censuses and various administrative efforts undertaken by the British, right? So this idea of religion itself is a foreign imposition. Is there a way to go back to that sort of pristine, pre-religious, harmonious age? I don't think so. Just because we are in this globalized world where the European or Western paradigm is the dominant one. However, we can challenge that paradigm in our own local efforts. I think even by utilizing terms like dharma instead of religion, or even tradition. Tradition is an English word after all, but it somewhat comes closer to what one might refer to as banta or sampradaya within this dharmic category. I don't necessarily know if it's possible to entirely explain this to somebody who is not of this background. And that kind of leaves you in this sort of like epistemic uncertainty, because that means that there is some truths which are inaccessible to people merely because of their cultural milieu. And that's something I'm still struggling with myself. And I think it's something that really we need to find a better answer for, because ultimately we're not alone in this world. We have to find ways to initiate dialogue.
Right. And just coming on the fact. So when you say you initiate dialogue, how do you even start? Because and see, this is what I have been trying to share it with my page and my expression as well. That I say that bad ideas need to be countered. People have rights, ideas do not. Right. So, for example, if I criticize Islam, which you would see a lot on my page, if I criticize Christianity or if I criticize Judaism, which is the core of the Abrahamic faiths or the tenets, that does not literally translates into criticizing a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, because a Jew or a Christian or Muslim, the complex product of their upbringing, their education, their friends, their families, and a religion plays a part in it, but it's not the whole thing, right? So you can have the entire spectrum of an atheist Muslim to a terrorist and everything that lies in between. So I do not have a problem with a large section of Muslims or Christians or Jews. It's just that I want to understand what is this theology that actively tries to convert people by hook or by crook, right? By pathologically lying about their own faith, by using violence, by subjugation or humiliation, because the entire idea here is to create as large as an in group as possible. And anybody that is not part of that in group is something which is, a fruit, or it's a reward basically to catch, to to bring into part of the circle. Either he or she is not enlightened enough to understand, or he or she is needs to be brought in by force or by lure. I mean, there are a number of ways in which Abrahamics do it. So my question to you is it even possible to have this conversation with an Abrahamic mind? Because for them, the in group and the out group mentality is really strong. But for us, the whole thing is ekam sat prabodha vedanti, which is truth is one. It's spoken in different ways by different learned people. These two are really not intersecting thoughts, right? So, is there a way to dialogue, and how do you imagine this bridge?
I think just building off of your point that an individual is not equal to the theological system which they might partake of, there is hope in that idea itself, because I don't believe that every individual who professes to follow a certain way of life necessarily follows it to the T. Of course, we have individuals like that, but I truly believe that dialogue can be initiated because people are people. And if we target a system of thought as a whole, we must do so from a place of good faith. I think that's the first place we have to begin with. And that's the way that you can actually even speak with people who belong to those ways of thinking. And that's something that's almost impossible to start in and of itself, just because of the nature of discourse in this day and age. We're doing this through social media. You're not going to get nuance on Instagram necessarily. It's very rare that you come across a thoughtful, well-reasoned out discussion which involves two assenting parties who are both speaking to one another in good faith. That in and of itself is so rare. So I think that it's really that we have to meet them on their own turf first, which is something that I try to do through my page, which is you have to learn how the algorithm works and just try and catch people first. You have to get them with various ideas that they might not necessarily find appealing or that are foreign to them. Then you have to explain to them somehow or the other that different ways of looking at the world do not imply a binary right or wrong situation, right? There's a mountain. There's multiple ways to climb up that mountain. It's not necessarily that one is wrong per se. And so I think my answer in short would be try to have good faith conversations, but that is of course very difficult. So you must try and allure people with methods that they themselves use in order to discredit your ways of thinking.
Okay, I am an Abrahamic. I want to hear you out. I want to have a meaningful conversation with Rishi. Is there this danger of having too many definitions and having no definition at all, which comes with Hinduism? Or am I missing on something? Tell me what Hinduism actually is.
Well, see, that's the thing, I suppose. We're fundamentally using a foreign idea to try and identify who we are. There's a quote by Wilfred Cantwell Smith that Dr. Sharma quotes in a podcast I did, which is, "There are Hindus, but there's no Hinduism," right? And also there's, I believe it was Dr. S.N. Balagangadhara who said that uh, Hinduism is not something that you will find outside of academia. So it is something that I personally am contending with, because that is something we can't necessarily dispute, that there is no one Hinduism. And that again finally comes back to the idea that we discussed earlier, which is that we're using foreign categories to try and understand ourselves. So as long as we adhere to these categories, we will face issues like this. Who is a Hindu? What is Hinduism? Because ultimately, it's the definition that Dr. Sharma gives, which is, a Hindu is one who professes to be one, which is somewhat self-referential. And of course, that brings up its own issues. But that's because we are trying to understand ourselves through the prisms of somebody else's definitions. So if you were to ask me who is a Hindu, I'd probably have to give Dr. Sharma's definition. But if we were to pry further, we could obviously point towards the fact that a Hindu is one who has allegiances to one of the traditions springing up out of the Indian subcontinent, which has adherences or at least links to ideas emanating from the Vedas, such as dharma, an avoidance of beef consumption. And again, these are not necessarily the defining criteria of what it means to be a Hindu, because being Hindu is such an amorphous definition. But these are points from which we can branch out and begin to understand what it might be like. So I think you gave the analogy of a tree earlier. We can also get the analogy of a rhizome here, which is that Hindu is an organism, or a body of organisms that kind of stretches out in various directions, connects in different ways to different ways of being and living. And ultimately, to understand what it is to be a Hindu, you just have to develop that recognition or ability to cognize what a Hindu truly might be.
And just speaking on Professor Arvind Sharma, one thing that he said was it's easier to define who a Hindu is than to define Hinduism, because any definition of Hinduism will always, by its very nature of exercise, fail to encompass one group of people. Like, so for example, what you pointed out, that, this trust in Veda, which is the Astika tradition, naturally deselects Nastika people, because Nastikas do not believe in supremacy of Vedas. Your Charvakas, your Jains, your Buddhists, these are Nastikas. But if you have a more broader definition where you say that, you have Hindus, you have Astika traditions, you have Shardarshan, you have Astikas, you have Nastikas, right? But then you would also come to your point like, okay, there is this group of people who are Chandals, there are a group of these people who consume dead people's meat. There are also studies that the earliest of Indus Valley civilization, there were people who were eating regularly, consuming meat, including beef. My whole point here is any idea of trying to distill a definition of Hinduism by its very own exercise will fail, because there is no single definition of Hinduism. And I think that is the beauty of it in some way, where it is accepting of everybody from a Nastika to a Nastika. You can be a Bhakti, you could be experimental with God, or you can just reject the whole God. So for example, how Rig Veda talks about the Nasabiyas of, where it is the foundation of the agnostic belief, where it says that whether there is a God or not, who created this world, I mean, we don't really know. Does the God even know? I think that's a good point. But the Abrahamic minds always try to seek boxes. It wants answer, searches for answer, because it wants to immediately, or at some point of time, hook itself to a belief. Because Abrahamic faith, by their very nature, are belief oriented. Dharmic traditions, by their very nature, are seekers, right? So we seek knowledge. Your truth and my truth could be very different. And I think there is this brilliant book by Herman Hesse called Siddharth. So it's a work of fiction, but the whole idea there is you have to seek your own truth. And the whole essence boils down to a fact that there was one Buddha and there were Buddhas before him. But there are millions of Buddhas. But how many of them could attain the nirvana or the mahaparinirvana Buddha could attain? Because all of them are trying to follow Buddha's teaching, but Buddha in itself would not have become Buddha from Bodhisattva to Buddha if he would have not ventured out and seeked his own truth, like
Yeah.
through an intense meditation, then he realized that there is this samyak madhyam path that he needs to take. And that was his truth. And eventually, the whole idea of taking Buddha and then following millions of people following him will not lead you to being Buddha. Eventually, all of you need to branch out and seek your own truth. And maybe you might find, or maybe you do not. And that is why this whole idea of birth and reincarnation is there, because the soul is unfulfilled in one life. It needs another birth to take it from there, move to earth, and eventually break out this whole cycle of Janma and Mrityu, right? Which is to attain moksha. And to come to this point, which I also sometimes struggle with, when people say that, Siddharth, and I want to ask you as well, this whole concept of moksha, do you feel that this is escapism in a nutshell, or do you feel there is something deeper in it? You're trying to break free from the cycle of life and death, but why do you even want to break free from this?
I don't think it's escapism. I think it's the opposite. I think it's life affirming, if anything. There's this perception within Western minds, predominantly because of people in the 19th century like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, who characterized Indian beliefs as being world denying, right? I think it's quite the opposite. I think if one is to attain moksha at all, one has to experience life and come to an understanding of what it is that they can truly get out of it. And there's various ways to understand and reach that way of moksha, but I think fundamentally it comes down to an understanding of having experienced life in its totality and understanding that there is no more that you need from it. So it comes from a place of satisfaction sometimes, in that you've experienced the highs and the lows and everything in between, and you have come to understand that beyond this dvesha and raga, there's nothing more to be experienced. So once you go past these, then you are eligible to obtain this experience, which gives you the totality of life. Which is why, of course, there are traditions which believe only in videha mukti, moksha, after death. But even with traditions that possess jivan mukti, you have this idea that by attaining moksha, you don't escape the world, you don't reject it. You continue to live in it and of it. You just merely don't let it affect you necessarily and provide you psychological turbulence. So I think, if anything, moksha is the completion of the human experience. It is what one reaches after having experienced everything and decided that they are satisfied. And I think satisfaction is ultimately the only way to get there, because if satisfaction is the cessation of desire, which is what is supposed to be liberation, right? And so if one can attain that state of contentment, satisfaction, and desirelessness, that is moksha. That's fullness.
And so I'm an Abrahamic, right? All of this is just too difficult for me to grasp. Right? I would just want to ask you some basic question, Rishi. Why do you guys don't eat beef?
There's a few reasons for this, and different people give different answers. Of course, we can go by the Vedic answer, which is that in the Vedas, go hatya is considered a terrible act. And so to commit that would be to go against the injunction of the Vedas. Then, of course, there is the aspect that we view the cow as the mother because we consume its milk. And so how can one kill their mother? How can one consume their mother? It's abhorrent to think of. Then you have people with the agricultural or the socioeconomic answer, which is that, India was an agrarian society. The cow is what we depended on to till our lands and such. And if one were to kill the cow or eat its meat, then one would be destroying their source of livelihood. But ultimately, I think one of the best answers is that these are all true in their own ways. But also, we don't see the cow as food. It's like asking somebody, why don't you eat a dog?
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.